With North Carolina remaining under a statewide shutdown order at least until May 8th, the focus for Governor Roy Cooper and his administration has now turned to testing and tracing and trends. Now, these are the items that are key to the metrics the governor says he's going to be using to decide when he will lift government restrictions on work and movement. But our next guest says that's not quite all the information we need. He says the Cooper administration should be running more models and very specific models. Don Vandervaart is senior fellow with the John Locke Foundation. He is also the former secretary of the Department of Environmental Quality for the state of North Carolina. Don, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You were writing a lot about this. You started your analysis really with the fact that several North Carolina state senators have been urging the Cooper administration to do more modeling. So exactly what do you believe we should be modeling? What should we know that we don't yet know?
Well, first we have to talk about modeling generally. Modeling can be very simple. It can be very complex. We know something about modeling in our lives when a hurricane is forecast, and we look at these the update of the hurricane, and there's hurricane tracking charts.
We're used to seeing the big cone of possibility.
There's a cone of uncertainty
Right.
is what that actually is, and sometimes you see these spaghetti curves, and that's really individual model runs being run under different conditions. The thing about modeling is when you're trying to model something very complicated, you can imagine our knowledge isn't absolute, and so the output is somewhat uncertain. So what do modelers do? Modelers tend to look back in time and take historical data and fit their models to that historical data by tweaking some parameters. And the hope is that if it fits the past, it'll give you a better idea of the future. Another thing they do is they'll take multiple models and run them all with the similar scenarios and see how they compare, because each model has some different assumptions built into it. And what first of all, what the senators asked was, hey, you all did some modeling early on, and using a model by the University of Washington. After a while, the DHHS stopped using that model, coincident, by the way, with the time that that same model predicted a very, very, very large decrease in COVID occurrences here in North Carolina. But then DHHS used another model, a kind of a modified University of Pennsylvania model, and they only ran it under two conditions. One, where there were no restrictions at all. Everybody just shook hands and didn't wash their hands, didn't stay at home.
And that, of course, has not occurred.
Which seldom occurs, I think. The other being total restrictions. And those two are sort of extreme scenarios. And what the senator said is, hey, why don't you run some more realistic scenarios in between? For example, a Swedish-type model, which Florida followed with such success, which is, let's just focus on the older component of our demographics and those with pre-existing conditions, and make sure that they are quarantined, etc. And the rest of the population just goes as they please. That's a different scenario than those other two. The other is, how about taking into account just everybody washing their hands like they ordinarily would during flu season, and whatever other precautions they take. So that's a fourth scenario. Now, that makes a lot of sense. My interest would be to do that, to also, though, use other models. For example, run the models that the University of Washington model, which has been used by a lot of other states. And I would also ask that you should just go granular and run those models at the county-by-county level.
That's an interesting point, Don, about county by county, because the statewide shutdown order is, in fact, that. It affects the entire state in exactly the same way. We've already heard from and seen some local government officials say, you know what, I know what's going on the ground in my community, and what happens maybe in one community in the western part of the state is not occurring in the eastern part of the state.
It makes no sense at all. Look, Mecklenburg County, Wake County, they may have their own set of challenges, but many of the other counties, some counties don't even have an occurrence yet at all of COVID, and others have very, very few. So these need to be handled differently. And we have the machinery in place. We have county health departments that know their own counties better than anyone.
Well,
I would just suggest using some models to help those folks understand where they are.
if we have the capabilities to do this kind of additional modeling that would be more granular, as you put it, it seems like that would really help to inform the decision making as to where we should go, not just as a state, but as local communities in that state. Why is this not happening?
I don't understand. From a simplistic level, it might be simpler to have everybody do the same thing all the time. But from a standpoint of trying to weigh the costs to the economy of these kinds of restrictions versus the benefits aren't going to be seen in these counties that don't have the major challenges that, for example, maybe New York City certainly, and to a much lesser extent, Mecklenburg and Wake County. You're exactly right.
Now, as you and I are talking, we have upwards of 800,000 North Carolinians who have applied for unemployment insurance benefits just in the last few weeks because of this, in part because of the statewide shutdown order that is in place at least until May 8th. I can tell you, Don, that I'm a middle-aged woman. I have not seen anything like this in my lifetime. I'm the child of Depression-era parents. I know that just hearing them talk about it, they didn't like to talk about it a lot. They would basically joke about it in terms of not having enough to eat, going to work. My father, when he worked in the fields when he was, just 8, 9 years old, he had to try to help support the family. It changed my parents as people. Is that what we're living through now for this generation?
I think it's certainly a lot closer. The idea is we're going to be able to get through this. I'm worried that unlike a human body that recovers from a disease, I'm not as positive that the economy will recover as quickly as the human body. There are going to be some small businesses that are not coming back, and this is going to create a recession. And it's going to create a severe recession. We don't know how long. But it seems to me that this is an example, I think, as you pointed out, for this generation of a really tough challenge, an existential threat, you might say, that's being posed by this coronavirus, not just by the virus itself, but the economic remnants of our economy after this passes.